Yes, Tony, this is the next step in what some of the Hillsborough families are calling now the quest for accountability. There have been 2 criminal investigations taking place here, including the biggest ever probe into police conduct. Over the last 4 years, they have followed up more than 10,000 lines of inquiry. Now, we know prosecutors will consider whether there's enough evidence to charge 23 people or organisations. A significant proportion of that, we understand, linked to the police, 8 of them linked to the alleged cover-up of what became Britain's worst sporting disaster. April 15th, 1989. What should have been a football match turned to tragedy. 96 men, women and children would lose their lives as a result of a crush in an overcrowded stadium. Now, some of those alleged to have been involved could be held to account.
We're looking at the decision makers, the people who ran the event, who were all organising the response to the disaster as it unfolded. We haven't identified any of spectators or others.
Last year, an inquest jury said police and the ambulance service caused or contributed to the loss of lives at Hillsborough. The Liverpool fans, they concluded, were not to blame. 2 criminal investigations were set up in the wake of an independent report. Operation Resolve has been looking at events before, during and immediately after the disaster, while the IPCC investigated police actions in the aftermath, including allegations of a cover-up and the police strands of Resolve's investigation. Hundreds of staff have taken thousands of statements.
I'm sure a vast majority of families will be pleased to see what's being done and what's getting done, and still got to be done as well, because they're still working on it. It's important to the nation to see that people will be held to account no matter what public office they're in. They are no different than an ordinary member of the public.
Some families, though, say they're surprised there aren't more suspects.
I'm sure they did hope for more. However, I think we've always been clear with our investigation into allegations of cover-up that we needed to start quite wide. There's quite a big scope. But what we were going to drill down to in the end was what we are calling the controlling minds. It's not just about how many amended statements were there, but what was the intent? Whose intent was it?
Prosecutors are being invited to consider charges ranging from health and safety breaches to misconduct in public office and gross negligence manslaughter. But the sheer amount of evidence being considered is immense, so it's likely to take months for the CPS to decide whether anyone will be charged.
OK, Andy, so what happens next then?
Well, firstly, investigations are continuing into 170 further allegations of police misconduct. Meanwhile, of course, the CPS now has that mammoth task of having to try and sift through hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence. Now, David Duckenfield was the police match commander on the day of the disaster. ITV News spoke to him this afternoon and asked him if he had a message today for the Hillsborough families.
What I said at the inquest, and I will always say, is this. I have the utmost respect for the families, and that's the reason I choose to be very brief in what I say. I have no wish whatsoever to upset anybody, and that's all I want to say.
As he said, David Duckenfield, along with hundreds of other people, gave evidence at the recent inquest. Now, anything said at those inquests may have a bearing on these investigations, but the evidence given and, in fact, the jury's conclusions will form only part of the bigger picture. In essence, it will still be many months before we know for sure whether anybody or any organisation will face charges.